Okay, so a community, it's all the different populations in a given area. A population is just a specific species in a specific area at a particular time. So different producers produce like plants, or the only thing that doesn't use light to produce are the chemosynthesizers you find in deep sea vents. Different types of consumers. Carnivores, what do they eat? Meat. Omnivores eat everything. Yeah, meat and plants, good. And herbivores eat plants. Pescatarians eat. Nobody cares. Okay, so all my pescatarians are in fourth period. I can say that. Community, interacting populations in a given area. So some things that we need to know about communities. Species richness. That means the number of species in that community. Also, you hear this referred to a lot of times as number of different species. Biodiversity, good. Relative abundance, the amount of populations for each one. I think we discussed this the other day and we mentioned this, and I think we called it species evenness. That's what your APES book calls it. We will use both of these to calculate. There is a biodiversity index that you need to know how to do in AP Bio called the Simpson's Diversity Index. And so I will give you that formula and we'll do some practice probably tomorrow or the next day. Because that is one of the things you'll see on the AP exam. Now, remember, on the AP exam, they give you a formula sheet. So you will have all the formulas that you need. You don't have to memorize them. I mean, you probably need to know how to do like slope. But all these other weird, obscure formulas of things that you haven't seen before, the formulas should be there, and you just have to apply your knowledge, okay? So the rivet model, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. I'm going to use a different model. I'm going to use the spider web model. So when we're talking about a community, are some species more important than others? Yes, which ones?
Producers.
You could probably producers. You could say sometimes the higher level consumers that may influence the population. Here's how you should think of it. Pretend you got a spider web. Are some strands on a spider web more important than others?
Yes.
Which ones?
The
middle ones are more important?
But like larger, bigger structural ones.
Like where?
Like the ones that are. It's
Have y'all never played with a spider web, destroyed one? How do you destroy a spider web? The outside ones. You've got maybe 3 or 4 on the outside that are hooked onto stuff, right? And what happens if you clip one of those outside ones? It like folds in on itself, right? So that's the same way in a community. There are some species in a community that are more valuable to that community than others. And if you take them out, then that ecosystem will start to kind of fold in on itself because you have wild and wacky things that start happening that shouldn't normally happen because that ecosystem gets out of balance. And so that's kind of how that rivet model goes, except I like my illustration better. All right, competition. Competition. The note writer characterizes this as a negative relationship. And I'm assuming he's doing this because if you are competing with food, even if you are the one that's getting the food, Matthew, what are you using if you have to compete for it?
Energy.
Yes, thanks, Matthew. So you are having to use lots of energy in order to compete for that source, whereas if you didn't have to compete and it was just sitting out there, you wouldn't use as much energy, okay? Competitive exclusion model. Now, in your book on page 1210, there's a bunch of lizards in the rainforest in the Dominican. Now, what do you notice about these lizards? The different species are the funny different names. Okay? These are all scientific names of different lizards. Where are they located? Are they in the same spot?
yes.
No, they're scattered out. Some are lower, some are higher, some are way higher. In a rainforest, remember, you have like the understory, the forest floor, the understory, the canopy, and then the emergent layer. So it's almost like you should think of it like an apartment building. So you have different floors, and there's different organisms that live at different levels. Why, if you're a different species, would you not want to live on the same level? Why, if you lived in an apartment building, would you not want to live in the same house as someone else? or in the same apartment. What?
You can have your own territory.
You can have your own territory, which means more
Space.
food, resources, and less competition. So the more you spread out, the more you occupy different niches, places within the community that are going to provide food and the things that you need, the less competition you'll have and the better off you'll be as a species. So there's a thing called an idea called the competitive exclusion model. Now, basically what this says is no two species are going to occupy the same niche. They're not going to live in the same place, eat the same food, that kind of thing. Why is that? You're not going to have two species occupying the same niche all the time. One will die out. Why?
Because the other one will eat all the food or like fight it off.
Because naturally, like evolutionarily speaking, one is going to be better. I don't think you're ever going to have a scenario where they're exactly the same or you have almost the same species, right? So one is going to have some type of competitive advantage. So that competitive exclusion principle says you can't have two living in the same area. So what do things do to avoid that? They separate out. Okay. Now, if you look at the barnacles on the page next, or the same page next to it, I'm going to give you the skinny on this since we're in a hurry on this. So on the top, you've got some blue barnacles and some brown ones, right? So this experimenter, this scientist, Mr. Connell, said, I wonder what happens if we remove the blue barnacles that are lower down in the tide zone. And he got out there and he removed them, which I imagine was a pain in the butt. And when he removed them, he's like, I wonder what will happen to the brown ones. Will they stay up high or will they spread out? What happened to the brown ones? They spread out. So they were occupying different niches to avoid competition. And that's called interspecific competition. And so that's to kind of avoid that competition. But when that competitor was removed, they naturally took over a larger area. Okay? All right, on the next page, 12:11, you've got another graph here. We've got some finches from the Galapagos. We've got Fortis and Fulingosa. I wish I could say scientific names. But anyway, we're going to call them yellow and green because that's how they're barred out here. So when the yellow one lives on this one island by itself, its beak size is what? Roughly what to what? 8 to 12, somewhere in there. 9 to 11, somewhere in there. All right, the green one, the green bars. That finch, when it's by itself, what's its beak size? 9 to 12. It's pretty close in the same range, right? Maybe a little bit slightly bigger than the other one, but not much. And then when they're found on the same island, what happens to their beak size?
The yellow gets smaller and
The yellow one's got smaller and the green one's got bigger. Why is that?
because they are avoiding competition.
They're trying to avoid competition. Their beak size has changed. What would cause their beak size to evolve?
How they get their prey.
What they're eating. So if you're eating bigger, harder nuts, you would need bigger beak. So you could imagine these are probably in different locations on those islands too. Some are hanging around in trees with bigger, larger nuts, and some of them are hanging around in trees with smaller, softer seeds. And in doing so, like you said, they reduce competition. So like I said, in this unit, think about energy, think about relationships. That's how you need to think of ecology. And all of this is going to lead into evolution. All right, this term given to reducing competition where you spread out in an ecosystem is called resource partitioning. You could think of a partition almost like in an office building where you have like cubicles. Everybody's in their own little space, okay? And now, obviously, there isn't some overlap. They come in contact with one another, but it does help them to limit that competition. Now, predation. Predation is a relationship between two things that we would call predator-prey. Good, thank you for participating. So, predation. One organism gets to eat, well, if they catch it, and the other organism gets to die. So that's a plus minus. Or if you are the predator and you miss the prey, then that's a positive for the prey because they don't die and get eaten. Or get eaten and then die. That's usually a worst case scenario, Matthew. Would you rather be killed before you're eaten or they start eating first?
Killed.
Yeah, I'd rather they put me out first. Me too. All right. parasitism. Let's talk about some different types of parasites. Ectoparasites. Ecto means outside. So this is like a tick or a mosquito on the outside of you. Unless that tick bores into your skin and then you can't get it out and you try to break it off and some gets left in there and you wind up having a itchy spot on your back for a year and a half because there's probably part of a tick embedded in your skin somewhere. Endoparasites. These are parasites inside your body like tapeworms or heartworms or other kinds of worms, or I don't know, the plasmodium that causes malaria. Parasites that feed off stuff inside your body. In general, parasites don't want to kill you. Why? Yeah, if you die, then there's their food source. So now there are some, this other one is a little bit different. Parasitoidism. So the best example I can think of this is there's a number of different like parasitic wasps that will sting spiders. I think there's a tarantula one of these. There's one in the Namibian desert that's really cool. And basically they come down, they sting the spider, it paralyzes them for about a week or so. They lay their eggs on it and then they cover it up with sand. So basically they're burying it. And then in about a week, their babies hatch out of the larvae. They start eating off the spider that's sitting there paralyzed and can't go anywhere, and then until they wind up killing it. So that's a fun little relationship that they have there. Okay, parasitoidism. Now let's skip over to the next page and talk about some other evolutionary advantages that organisms have in response to their environment. So one, chemical defense isn't mentioned, but we all know about our friends the skunks. They have some chemical defense to deter predators. Cryptic coloration, like camouflage. So you've all seen organisms that have good camouflage. All of us that hunt practice wearing good camouflage as a way of sneaking up on our prey. It could also be a way of being avoided. If you're trying to be avoided, you want to blend in with the environment. All right. The next thing, aposematic or warning coloration. Now, a lot of times we think about this with our friends, the poison dart frogs. Now, not all poison dart frogs are deadly. Some are deadly to humans. Some would just make you sick if you licked them. For those of y'all, we watched cane toads last year. Yeah, those cane toads, you don't want to smoke those either because they'll mess your brain up. But anyway, you remember that guy? He smoked the cane toad and like he saw the world through the eyes of a cane toad. Maybe we didn't watch that part. Anyway, stay away from cane toads. That's another bad one. Now, the next one is mimicry. There's two types of mimicry. One, the Batesian type, where you're mimicking a harmful organism, but you're not actually harmful. Like this moth here on page 1212. There's some kind of butterfly, I can't remember what the name of it is, but it mimics and looks almost like a monarch butterfly. Monarch butterflies are toxic. And so predators will avoid this type of butterfly because it looks so much like a toxic one. And then you have the other time, Müllerian mimicry, where you have harmful or toxic organisms that look like other harmful or toxic organisms. So basically you all look like you're going to do something bad and everything leaves you alone. An example are things that look like yellow jackets. Yellow jackets, wasps, things of that nature that all look very similar. What do you do with those? Yeah, you run away. You stay away from them because they look like they're going to sting you and cause you to whelp up, and it's not very pleasant. All right, last few things here. Different types of relationships, how organisms interact. One, mutualism. We already talked about parasitism. Mutualism, what is that? Both benefits, so that's a plus-plus relationship. Parasitoidism is negative, positive. One's benefiting, the other's hurt. Mutualism, both benefit, like a bee and a flower. What's another one? The clownfish and the anemone. So things like that where both organisms benefit. Now, there's another type of relationship where one benefits and the other's pretty much unaffected. Sorry. And this is called commensalism. So like we see a lot of moss growing on trees around here. So that's a commensalistic relationship. One benefits, the other's unaffected. Sometimes you see birds hanging around cows. And basically what they're doing, or like the picture in your book on the next page, I think, when it talks about this with the buffalo. So sometimes birds will hang around cows because as the cows move along and walk, they stir up insects. So the birds will grab the insects. They're not really helping the cows out, but they do get food for the birds. So that's another commensalistic relationship. And another type of parasite that you normally don't think of is like a plant parasite. We have a lot in the trees around here. If you look in the parking lot when you go outside, you'll see some of these. What type of plant parasites do we have? Some of you might like to make out under this one during Christmas season. Mistletoe. Mistletoe. Do you know mistletoe is a parasite? If you go to the parking lot and you look up some of those oak trees and you see little green branches that are sticking up, maybe like this big, and they've got a bunch of green leaves on them, but everything else, all the leaves are gone and it's not green, yeah, that's mistletoe. That's a parasite that is living off that main tree. Any questions? Super.